All right, my friends, it is the Remodelers on the Rise show. If you're watching the live or the video version of this, you see, guys, I was just about to say you see two smiling faces and you're both not smiling. Oh, no, Peter's causing trouble already. We have Peter Rainey and Justin Kolich, one from Rainey Blair down in the Atlanta area, although he may be coming live from a motorhome in Delaware today. Is that true?
That's true.
What
July
town
4th.
are July 4th
We're
weekend?
we're in Marydale. It's literally
Marydale,
town
Delaware.
split on the line of Maryland and Delaware.
Oh, that's how they came up with the name of it.
Clever, right? Real original.
Clever folks up in the Northeast. And then we have Justin Kolich with Ann Arbor Remodeling. Justin, I still think you hit a home run with that business name. Because it's not like you grabbed it back in the 70s. Like, it's just rock solid.
I got lucky.
Very good. So both of these gentlemen are I'm going to even say friends and clients. Both of them are part of something I have this year called the VIP Club. So we met in person back in May. We're going to do it again in October. And through that, through some of that training, through some of sharing how they're approaching, how they're pricing for their work, this concept of capacity-based markup came up. You probably see it if you follow my work, or if you heard me interview others, or if you're part of the Remodelers Community Facebook group. This idea of volume-based markup, capacity-based markup. Michael Anschel has coined it, right? That's like his phrase, COPE, cost of project execution. These different models have popped up, and I think it's continued to be wise for me to just continue to talk about it, to bring in examples. And what we have today came from, I think, one of the posts that Justin, you may have made on the Remodelers community page. And I thought, all right, let's have you guys come aboard, talk about how you're approaching capacity-based markup, the who, what, where, how, the pros and cons of it, and see if we can't help some fellow remodelers out. That's what we're doing today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd add to that intro?
Peter started the trouble on Facebook, not me.
Okay. Peter started it. Good enough. Good enough. So before I even share my screen or take a stab at it myself, which of you would like to take a stab at defining what capacity-based markup means? Peter, since you caused the trouble to start this whole thing up, why don't you take a stab at it? Go ahead and explain it.
It's really spreading your overhead costs across the project based on your ability to produce the work.
So I heard two things there. One, I heard my overhead costs. So one thing that is mandatory with capacity-based markup, and frankly, volume-based markup, and frankly, anybody who's trying to make profit running a remodeling business, is to be very clear with what our total overhead costs are. So that was one thing you just mentioned. So for both of you, what are your overhead costs, and how do you define that? What's included in it, what's not? Justin, go ahead. How do you kind of calculate what is in your overhead?
What is in our overhead is anything that we cannot attribute to a job, a specific job. So your typical things, owner's comp, rent, advertising, stuff like that.
Yep.
Not a lead carpenter's van, not a lead carpenter's gas, but anything we can't attribute to a job or to a job cost.
Yeah. So this year, and yours kind of changes as the year goes on. You might look at it every quarter. What is your approximate overhead cost this year, Justin?
I want to say 275, but we've made changes in the last few months, so I could be off.
Yeah. The example we looked at, the VIP Club, was about 330,000.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was you planning for some additional overhead that was going to be coming up, right?
Yep.
So 330,000 overhead costs. Your salary is included in that? Yep. Is your net profit included in that?
Nope.
Right? So total overhead. So you got to be very clear with what that is. Now, if we have about $330,000 of overhead for the year, that comes out to about $27,000 a month. That comes out to $6,300 a week. And we're going to have to kind of go slow through this a little bit, right? So total, and I'll actually share this screen that I had pulled up. Total overhead, 330,000. Monthly of $27,000, weekly of $6,300. Okay. And then explain how this weekly per 3 jobs works. I think that's kind of the key to this. And then Peter will kind of switch over to you and kind of show how you've gone about calculating this. But Justin, explain this weekly per 3 job thing.
So essentially our capacity for this year and last year was three jobs at a time. We have 3 lead carpenters who each handle 1 job at a time. At the bottom, it says if 4 at a time. Next year, we plan on switching to four projects at a time. But it's based on our capacity because we do 1 project at a time. We have small filler projects in between. If we're subbing out something like drywall, we might have 2 weeks for a lead carpenter to go do something. But essentially, we do 3 projects at a time.
So what you're showing here is if we have 3 projects at a time, and for those of you listening, you heard that he has in-house labor. When I have Peter share it, he does not have in-house lead carpenters. So in this case, Justin, if you had a 4-week project that you were doing, what would you be charging the client for your services?
For a 4-week project, roughly $8,400 for overhead.
Yep. You take that $2,100 a week times the number of weeks that you're expecting to complete the project. All of the rest of your proposal would be all of your costs, which you have a lot of your job related costs, full labor burden in there. And then the other line item they would see on your proposal is the profit line, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So let's pause there for a second. Is everybody following us so far? It's making sense, right? We need to know our total overhead. We can divide that out by how much per week in your business you need to cover for your overhead. And then depending on how many projects you have going on, dictates the amount that you need to charge for every week that you're on that project. Capacity-based markup in this case. Okay. And Peter, yours is kind of similar, correct?
Yeah, very similar. We do run similar but different business models in the sense that he has lead carpenters and we don't. We have project managers.
Yep.
That's probably the main difference, I'd say. But for simple math, I took all overhead, which is all salaries, which part of our salary is obviously project managers. That is be attributed to the job cost. To Justin's point, have as much as you possibly can in the cost to produce the project, and then everything else is overhead.
Okay. So Justin,
yeah,
go ahead, please.
I was going to say how we did our math calculation is probably similar. We assume 3 projects per project manager at any given time. The greatest thing I think is for us is add a lot of clarity to when can we actually start a project. Prospect calls, when can you start? Well, you can look at your production calendar pretty simply and go, okay, if these projects are lined up, this is when they're planned to end. So we assume 48 weeks in a year. I know there's 52.
So,
but
so
PTO,
let's walk right through here. So this top line,
yeah.
when with Justin's was 330,000, let's say. Justin, can you imagine having another $1 million of overhead that you'd have to deal with? These guys are crazy. Okay,
but there's about 850 in salaries and about 467 all the other stuff, slippage, warranty, overhead, blah blah blah,
showroom, etc. So you've got 1.3 million, let's call for rounded purposes, that you're trying to cover. You've divided that going straight to number of weeks. You had estimated 48, assuming some time off. So that makes it so we need to cover 27,000 and change per week across the board. Okay. And what you have here is 6 active projects at any given time. So each week that each of those projects are going, there needs to be a charge of about $4,600 each week for that. Tell us about this buffer rate.
So we do add a buffer at this point. It's a new pricing model for us, obviously, so that helps. But the other thing I think it helps with, as you're analyzing your overhead throughout the year and you need to make adjustments, where you have projects already been priced, already being produced, so you can't really go back and reprice those, but it helps catch up. If you have added expenses through the year, it'll help minimize any potential difference there. So we add that in. So we
So that's a takeaway, whether you're thinking about doing capacity. By the way, anybody watching or listening to this, what you need to be focused on right now is not, well, why do you do it that way? Or, I do it this way. No. Just try to understand what they are doing and fully understand it before we worry about how that compares to what you're doing. I had to add that in there. But this is a good best practice. When you realize that, let's say, for example, your estimating may not be as sharp and detailed as you need it to be. Don't wait until everything's perfectly dialed in. Ooh, that's a good phrase. You guys ever hear that? Dialed in? They're laughing because it
Yeah,
was
a few times.
it was the theme of our May meeting. Let's just have a buffer in there because we know we're going to be missing a little bit here, or we've got some things to dial in and figure out. So you have a little buffer there. So basically what you have here is about $5,300 a week needs to be charged to each of the projects we have going on to pay for all of our overhead. And then over here, we assign 70% of this number to project execution and the remainder to overhead. What does that mean?
I mean, we've done the time-based studies, and for the record, we do not track time in that sense, but we've done the time studies to understand what numbers are part of the project execution and what's part of overhead. In addition to that, like, we know the numbers, so that's how we apply them. But also there's a certain level, and it's by no way smoke and mirrors, but a certain like palatability, if that's a word, by the client when they see the numbers and digest them and how it's laid out. And that's part of it as well.
I think so. For example, what I was just talking about there is you have a section in your proposal, and I'm showing here, that's called project execution. And
Right.
like you said, when I figure out that I have about $5,400 a week that needs to go through this project, and I calculate that total out, 70% of that total is going towards project execution, and
Yeah.
the rest of it is down here at the bottom under builder overhead allocation.
Yep.
Okay. And
we
then
want the client to really understand the people that we have on staff. That's part of a cost to perform your project.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and the way that you arrive at these numbers for each of these line items under project execution, how are you divvying up these numbers? A little bit
So,
of wild
yeah,
guessing, or a little bit of brilliance, or what?
you got to wild guess some stuff.
Okay.
But we've done time studies, so we understand how much time it theoretically should take a PM to do, client meetings and communication, for example, the fourth line there. Now, but certainly every project's different, but we're not trying to get like to the penny on every single line. It's just based on large assumptions we made through time studies we've done internally. We know the amount of time it should take for each of those.
Yeah. So this number here, and then Justin, I'm going to flip to your proposal. This number here, that 43,680 of the project execution, and this number down at the bottom of builder overhead allocation of 18,000. When you add those two numbers together, that is coming from the thing we were just looking at, which is this, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so that's how we're getting to that selling price. And then in addition, you have a 15% builder profit that you charge to get to the final selling price.
Profit margin. I think the beauty of the capacity base, also for people, and myself included, who get confused easily by markup and margin, this erases all that. Who cares? Ultimately, it's what's in the profit, either whole number, dollar, or whatever, if you want to do markup or margin method at that point. But it's more simple to understand what profit do I want to make, because everything else you've already calculated based on your weeks or days. And we choose weeks. And I think Justin's similar. You could do hours, days. I mean, you could pick any unit of measure you'd like, as long as you know how you're producing your work and how you want to charge for that.
Yeah. And Peter, how long have you guys been approaching it this way?
We've been dabbling in it since the beginning of the year, and we were at the VIP event, and Justin was talking about capacity base, and it really kind of lit the fire for us to fully move to this method.
Got it.
Because we're also transparent, which has nothing to do with necessarily being capacity based markup, but being transparent almost requires you to be away from a markup based method.
Got it. Good. All right. And then Justin, back to yours, where you had calculated it. Where is it hiding on me? There was a slide. So the example we have in here is 1,900, but we kind of arrived at that amount per week. In this proposal, it was $1,900 a week I need to be charging. So for this project, you're expecting it to take 12 weeks. So I take my $1,900 a week of overhead that I need to cover times 12 weeks, plus a 1% risk equals that price. And then you additionally have, what does this come out to? Is this another 10% or a little less in profit?
10%.
10%. Okay. And then up at the top, you have a couple other line items. One being kind of your estimating and charging $720 for that. And then you also have a management section of pre-construction meetings, permits, scheduling, similar to what that list that Peter had there. So when we add up the 720 plus the 6,000, plus the overhead expenses and profit, we get to our selling price. So when you tally all of this up, it comes out to a 36% margin. You wrote, even though I have a hard time understanding this quite yet, margin is irrelevant to me. Okay, fair enough. But at the end of the day, Justin, in this example, you're coming in a little over 36% gross profit margin. Peter, in the case of yours, you guys are coming in about 43% gross profit margin. Right. So if you took, for example, folks, if you had all of your costs times 1.67, a little bit of the golden rule in our industry, it would come out to a 40% gross profit. The way that they're approaching this and the way that they're showing this, and Peter, you were hinting at it, is the way this hits and lands for clients and for prospects is a bit different. And Justin, I think you feel similar, where it's pretty transparent. The numbers are out there. Let's kind of talk about that for a second. And Justin, what's been your experience? You've been doing this for a couple of years, yeah?
I started it about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
But we usually have a 6 to 9 month, backlog of work, so it didn't really kick in till the end of last year.
Got it.
I've been tweaking it ever since.
Okay. And how has it been from a feedback from your client standpoint? What does that kind of look like or felt like?
I haven't got a lot of feedback from clients. We're selling about the same as we were.
Okay.
It's been easier for me if people make changes to projects or add or reduce scope or add or reduce finished materials. But I haven't got a lot of feedback.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right. So that was, do you feel like we did a good job of explaining how it works?
Yeah.
Like if you guys didn't, I think, and in the comments, people, let us know. Now that's a good looking group of men right there. I mean, that's true. Great timing. We're looking at implementing COPE and capacity based overhead and profit within the next month. Cool. All right. So again, you have to know what your overhead is, calculate it out. Now let's talk about kind of some of the pros and cons. So when we have calculated that, Justin, looking at your example of 12 weeks, what happens when this project, where again, you've arrived at that $1,900 a week based on, I know what my weekly total overhead I need to cover is. I know I have 3 projects going on at any given time. Therefore, I charge $1,900 a week for every week. So from weeks 1 through 12, cool, I've got it covered. What happens when it goes beyond that into week 13, 14, 15?
We lose $1,900 a week of our net profit, with the exception of the 1%
risk factor.
Risk factor.
Okay.
Yep.
And how often is that happening for you guys?
Not very often, although it has happened. It has happened in the past.
Right. And why do you think some of the reason why are you having some good fortune of it not going over?
We're just doing more projects that we've done. So like the example project that's up there, we did a very similar project for their neighbor 4 years ago. So I have the schedule to pull from. So we track everything and we have history to look at it. So we're getting better and better.
Peter, is it a fear that you have of crap? These projects are going to go further past what we had anticipated. Therefore, it's going to eat into our profits. What's your thought on it?
It certainly is a fear, but like most fears, you got to figure out a way to overcome them. And I think in this capacity base puts more focus for the entire team on how long is this going to take. So you're getting towards the middle or towards the entering this kind of final weeks of a project. The entire team understands and knows we have, 2 weeks left in this project. How can we get this thing pushed along and completed? So what gets measured, what gets improved? I've heard that before. Yeah,
there you go. So, focus on the weeks of a project puts the entire team's focus on that, and what gets measured gets improved. We were talking before we kind of hit the live button. I was asking about that particular question. Justin, in your case, you're in both of your cases, you're giving yourselves a little bit of wiggle room, right? We're not going to make it as tight as possible, but it definitely is putting focus from the start to the finish on the amount of time this project takes, which, by the way, is great for client satisfaction. It's great for profitability. And I think the other thing, so there's a risk there, but the other thing that it does is it puts the focus that it puts, it feels a lot different than if it was just volume based and you're like, well, this project drug on and no, we didn't produce as much revenue as we were expecting, but we'll just make more next month. it takes that and kind of moves that off to the side. And it's like, look, we are basing everything on our time frame. And in your guys' business, it is just as important, if not more important, because of the way you're doing this, to make sure that we're hitting those weeks. I think on the volume based, the same thing is happening as far as the profit, the eating into the profit. It's just that you don't feel it in the moment like you guys would. Right. And similarly, if you finish it a week before, it's helping you on the plus side.
Yep.
Yeah. And you should job cost the same way you job cost the materials and labor, whether it be trade partners, in-house, whatever. You job cost that. You can also apply that same principle to job costing your overhead. How do we make out? Do we finish on time? Do we finish behind? Like, and why? Why do we finish the way we finished? So now you can analyze that also. But the biggest thing we were talking about before is you can't explain to me the cost of a 2x4 times your potential markup has anything to do with your actual overhead. When 2x4s are $3 and then another $7 or $12, wherever they are today, I don't know. How does that change your overhead? So it's kind of the murky number of like, how do you know you're covering your overhead? Like, we have to cover overhead and we want to make a profit. You don't have to make a profit, but it's certainly nice and you want to.
So in that case, the other benefit of that, of not tying it to the price. So I think this is what kind of riled the people up on the Facebook group, is like, look, whether they pick that 60 square foot, countertop versus a 40, that doesn't really matter to me. I'm not adding an additional markup, and it puts you. Do you guys feel like this approach puts you on the same side of the table with prospects instead of a little bit of on either side of the table, and a little bit more on each other's team versus me versus you?
Which is my goal anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Justin and I were talking about this before, where if a client said, we have all of our projects, all of us have this issue, right? It's like, client wants to provide something for whatever reason, tile, plumbing fixtures. In this case, it's like, yeah, you want to, sure. It doesn't change the way I approximate projects. It almost incentivizes them not to, because when markup method, right, they're potentially maybe capturing that markup back, right? So now there's not incentive for them to want to provide. There's less of incentive to provide something potentially.
And when that does come up now, and I explain that to a client, they never want to provide anything. They say, "Oh, okay, you just take care of it." So it's just kind of a mute point of that.
And Justin, you wrote because you 5P, proper preparation prevents poor performance. You guys 5P'd for this beautifully. People listen to this. They made a call to each other. They kind of compared notes. They prepared for this. I mean, I have 4 hours of preparation in this. I don't know how many hours you guys have, but one of the things that Justin, you wrote up some of these pros and cons. And one of the things that is easy to have budget conversations with clients. It's kind of what both of you were just mentioning. It's just more clear, and we're on the same team here. We're not up against each other.
Well, can I? You were asking Justin before client feedback. A lot of our clients, they want to know, because we do transparent pricing, which has nothing to do with capacity. They're not the same, or they don't have to be coupled. But a lot of them want to know, okay, we're showing the numbers. How do we calculate that? And they're not questioning why you calculate. It's more just want to understand. And when you say we base on these factors, this, they go, oh, okay, cool. Sounds good to me. But when you say, oh, we charge, 80% markup. Okay, maybe you could also then have that same conversation with them. Okay, that's fine, and charge what you want to charge. But when I select things, then why does my price, like, how does your overhead change because I made a selection on a higher countertop? How does your overhead change because of that? So that's when we get more questions, when we were more markup method based and they were making selections and our markup was tied to their potential selection, good or bad.
Yeah. Do you guys think this is the one and best way to price your work as a remodeler?
I don't think there is a one and best way, but I do think it's the best way for my company right now, without a doubt.
And Peter, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would never want to force anything on anybody. It's really just, here's the options, here's the ways you can potentially charge. It's just, when you think about why and how we do the capacity base, it's, when you estimate a project, you want to know how much materials, how much labor do I have in this project? Why would you not also want to know how much overhead am I going to have also in this project? The same principle of estimating just carried out through your company. Then you have profit on that.
So part of the reason I asked that question was a little bit of a trick question, but it was also kind of going back to what I said earlier of stop defending the way you do it. Whoever's watching this, stop defending. Just understand it detailed. The thing that I'm seeing more and more of, and it's the reason I've interviewed Michael Anschel several times on his COPE, cost of project execution. It's the reason we're having this conversation. It's the reason in my teaching, I've always taught kind of volume-based markup. It's what's been very clear in our industry and what the majority of folks are doing over the last couple of years. It's not just because, I'm paying more attention to this and we're just randomly talking about this. There's a shift and there's more people intrigued by this model or the COPE model because of what's actually happening in our market. When our material pricing are fluctuating like this, when costs are going up and down, when 2x4s or OSB is going up and down, when projects are getting into the six figures and beyond, especially, we'll talk about that in a second, but when projects are getting bigger, there's just more demand and more interest and more need for us to have some more transparency and for people to understand where their dollars are going. So it's interesting that this isn't necessarily the be all end all model. Peter, you guys are kind of, okay, we went a little COPE model and we took what we liked and we tried that. You guys are kind of tweaking it. Justin, you read about this. Where did you originally read about the capacity based?
I believe it was David Gerstel.
Okay.
A long time ago.
Yeah, nail your numbers. He was a guest. I think, you mentioned that of like, one, you guys are both studying this. You guys are both paying attention to what makes sense for your business. It's shifting. Don't fall in love with the way you've always priced things. Be open to understanding this, looking into it, experimenting. The cool thing about a new pricing model like this is go ahead and price it the way you normally do, and then try to apply this to your business. And just see what the difference is. See how it presents differently. You guys can do that, especially if you know what your overhead is. It's easy to, if you're doing volume-based markup, you better stinking know what your overhead number is, because that's a key way that we calculate it. You better stinking know what your net profit goal is, because it's a key way we calculate it. Now take those numbers and apply it to what the way they're doing it here. Talk to me about smaller projects versus larger projects. How does this fit in there? You guys both have some thoughts on that.
Small projects for us kind of get squeezed out. Now, there's not to say there's not a way to make those work, but that's just also this is where our business is geared right now. Justin can probably speak similarly on that also.
Yeah,
in your case,
we end up being more expensive on smaller projects and less expensive on larger projects, which is what we're focusing on.
Gotcha. Yeah, you guys are both moving towards the bigger ones.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that I think the post that kind of sparked this for us was, we had a prospect come in. It was some kind of addition or carport enclosure or something. And we explained to them how we were pricing by weeks of a project. And the guy was a finance something or another. So he's super smart or whatever. And he came back to us that day, like 3 hours later. He's like, so if you're here 10 or 12 weeks, can I put the kitchen in too? Like, how much more time would that add to being here? So for him, he's getting a deal in that sense, because we're going to be there 10, 12 weeks, whatever, whatever the project is. So clients that are more savvy to it, they'll understand, I can get more work. We're going to be here. We can maybe add a powder bath in, add a laundry. So maybe you could add a quote unquote smaller project as part of something else. They get a deal. Your overhead's effectively the same, but you'll also make additional profit on that too. So it's a win for everybody involved.
Gotcha. And the other thing that's jumping out of me is, hey, remodeler listening to this, can you tell me how long it took your last 10 projects to take? When was your start date and when was your completion date? Are you looking at that closely? Even if you don't do capacity based, start paying attention to your start and end date. Do you have a goal for your end date? Well, Kyle, supply chain. And then out the other end of your mouth, you're telling me you have a 9-month backlog. You're telling me that there's materials that you're waiting on once you started the project? Or are you telling me that we didn't get everything finalized and selected and done in enough time and we didn't order it ahead of time? That, just ranted there for a second. I apologize. Right. But pay attention to it. Yes, there's factors. Yes, there's COVID still. Yes, there's, material issues. Yes, there's the stinking cabinets that came in and they're done poorly and you have to reorder them. Yes to all of that, but start paying attention and setting a goal for when you're aiming to have this project done by. like Peter, what you were saying, what I was saying, what gets measured gets improved. Pay attention to that. And the more you pay attention to that, the more you probably can build confidence in moving towards maybe something like this. Somebody asked this question: how do you adjust for risk when customer decides to choose something that is considerably more expensive, or is it in the noise level? I'm not sure what that last part is, but to that first part, what do you guys say to that?
I'm not sure what noise level is exactly, but if it takes more management for a particular type of project, we would add a management fee. If it's just risk, we're making 10% on it anyway. I guess if I ever get screwed, maybe I'll address it, but I'm okay with making 10% on it.
I think part of what the expensive is getting at is if I'm installing a $20,000 countertop versus a $10,000 countertop,
our fabricator's doing it, and he's assuming the risk, right? So I'm not.
Yeah, so the risk is on them. Yeah.
I mean, I think some of that is assumed by the subcontractor, the trade partner, like the countertops. I mean, our fabricator is assuming potential risk there, but you could also factor that in and have more warranty. You could have, add more for that project in warranty, or add more for potential slippage, or there's other dials that you could turn up or turn down potentially to apply to capacity for that.
Yeah. This one was factor. How does this factor in callbacks? I think it's what you just said there, Peter. It's like, well, with callbacks, that's a lot of times when we have callbacks where we have warranty type work, I'm not sure how you gentlemen do it, but a lot of times that is in your overhead expenses.
Yeah.
I've got a line item that says warranty work, $4,500 is what I'm expecting to possibly pop up. Not for you guys. Your guys is probably like $200 because we're such good remodelers. We never have any callbacks. But for most of the people listening, it's like $4,000. So the way that's already getting paid out of the overhead. What have we not touched on that you think is pretty important in this capacity-based markup conversation, gentlemen? I
would just reemphasize that this is really simple. It's a really simple way of doing it. It's not easy. You have to, it's hard to figure out all your numbers. You have to track everything. It takes time to track everything and have some history to look at, but it is extremely simple. It's extremely simple for the business owner to understand once he gets it. It's extremely simple for the client to understand. It's simple for the lead carpenter to understand. It's not just a $100,000 project. It's broken down. It makes sense to everybody. And it's simple.
What else would you say, Peter?
I mean, I'd agree to that for sure. I mean, it is simple. It erases the whole margin markup complexity that a lot of people struggle, including myself, with. And I have an accounting degree. You think that'd be something I could figure out.
But you got an accounting degree from what? Like Clemson? It's not like you got an accounting degree from the University of Michigan. What?
Yeah. It's still top 25 university. Come on.
Okay. No, I'm sure.
But ultimately, it's okay. I digress.
It's also what?
I mean, national championships. I don't know. That's important too, right?
No, we were moving on. What else did you say?
It's tied to your production. I mean, I just can't. The estimating part of it, where it's Justin we were talking on Friday about this. He had a friend sold, and like most of us, right? You can sell as much work as you want right now, but what can you produce? How much can I actually produce this year based on what I sold? And knowing more capacity, at least understanding your overhead and what you can produce from that, it helps you make hiring decisions. So maybe you have a 6, 9, 12 month backlog. Okay, let's hire some people. We can start producing these projects. And every person I hire, this is how many more projects I could potentially produce.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. When you had this, and Justin, you were saying, boy, when we expand, if we have another lead carpenter, and all of a sudden we can take on 4 projects at a time, I just made myself a lot more reasonable. What's the word I'm kind of looking for? Just more affordable. And likewise, if you had 2, you would have to charge more in order to cover your overhead. So that's pretty interesting. And then we had a couple in here. Oh, Gerald Hayes. Gerald, we know you're a big capacity-based markup guy. He says it's extremely simple. Please publish to the vault the initial spreadsheet that were shown as examples. You guys okay if I do that?
Yeah.
Somebody, no picking on South Carolina. Okay, fine. College football is shifting very quickly, gentlemen. But that's a story for another day. Justin, you also typed up these 2, and I thought we'd just read them real quick. Some examples of this. Kitchen project. The price is higher than the client's budget, and they're wanting to reduce the cost. They decide to go with cheaper appliances and cheaper cabinets. This is easy for us to swap out. It will decrease our net profit slightly. because the price is coming down. Your 10% that you're charging, decrease that a little bit, but would not decrease our overhead at all. Those line items based on the number of weeks for the project will stay strong. Or deck project, whether a client chooses Trex or treated wood decking, our overhead did not change. So why should our overhead be tied to the product they choose? If a project takes 4 weeks to complete, we need to make sure our overhead is covered no matter what products the client uses. And Peter, that's kind of what you were getting at in the last thing you were mentioning.
Right.
Excellent. Cool. So I think we kind of a job well done. Thank you, gentlemen, for preparing and showing some examples. We will share the different examples we showed here, so that people can kind of take it from, okay, that sounds interesting, but what were the numbers again? You do have to wrestle with this. You do need to dig into it and ask questions. You got 3 gentlemen on this conversation that are happy to answer any questions. Feel free to post it in Remodelers community if you're not part of that and you're listening to this, by the way, remodelerscommunity.com. And I would say that let's go just around the horn and say, hey, if you heard nothing else in this conversation, I hope you heard this. I'll start by saying, none of this is accurate or can be calculated if you're not very clear with your numbers. You've heard me and 10,000 other people say, know your numbers. And this is an example of that. You need to be very clear with what is your overhead expenses. Well, what goes in overhead? Let's wrestle with that. Does my owner's salary go in it? Yup. What about my project manager? Well, depends. There's some things that you got to get clear with what is a cost of goods sold and what is your overhead expense, what you want for net profit. Peter, you guys just decided, you know what? None of this 8 to 10%. I'm putting stinking 15% net profit on each of these projects. And when the prospect or client asks me about it, I say we charge 15% for a profit at the end of the day. Similar, right, for you, Justin. Justin just got inspired. He's moving his up to 14, up from 10. But when you know your numbers, you can do that. So that's my biggest takeaway is know your numbers and then experiment with this. Even if you don't go this route, go through the exercise of running the numbers and learn something. We'll go age before beauty. So who goes next? I don't know.
I think I'm actually
younger. I
don't know either. Justin, what's your kind of, if you heard nothing else?
In line with that, knowing your numbers, know your schedule, know what you can produce, because it's all tied together.
I like it. And then Peter?
For me, the beauty of this is margin doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It's all about cover your costs and add whatever profit you want. It could be 5, 15, 30, 40, whatever percent you want. But you don't have to worry about margin ever again. Markup versus margin.
Yep.
Arguments and all that.
And continue to pay attention to that, continue to do job costing. One thing that I just know that you guys are going to be doing, one, because you're good businessmen, but I just know you're going to be doing it 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, is every project you do, you're going to be paying very close attention to your schedule. You're going to be looking at your job costing closely. As you make a decision to add to overhead, you're going to adjust that weekly amount. You add somebody to your team, and just in your case, go from 3 to 4, you increase the capacity. That has an impact on how you price your work. This model really forces you to grapple with your numbers and consistently pay attention to them, which is what every remodeler needs to be doing. Know your numbers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for unpacking this idea for us.
Thanks for having us.
See ya.